What's going on, guys? It is Tom Radigan, and let's just make this light a little bit brighter. Can we do that? Let's see. Can we do that? All right, we got my magic working. All right, what's going on, guys? It is Tom Radigan, like always, and for today's video, we are going over just the important career of Jerry Lee Lewis. Rest in peace, Jerry Lee. Oh my God. We lost this great legend on Friday. And, you know, it's sad because, I've talked about other rock artists passing away before, like Don Everly, Little Richard, and how they were like, the last of the 50s, but it was like, thank God we still had Jerry Lee Lewis. And now he's gone. And now it really is an end of an era. And the 50s, as a generation of rock artists, all of them are gone now. And now they're just going to be a memory. And it's sad because listen, they're older, and of course, they couldn't play as once did. But it's sad that we finally realized that. And what's sad too is when Jerry Lee Lewis died, it was like, it's not like I wasn't sad, of course, but it wasn't like, it was like, "Oh god, what a, like, goddamn, like, this is a crazy loss," because, when Chuck Berry died, he was the first one, because everybody else has been gone. And, when Chuck Berry died, that was upsetting for me because it made me realize that, oh my god, we really are gonna lose these guys soon. Then Fats Domino died later that year, then Little Richard died 3 years later, and then now Jerry Lee Lewis 2 years later. And, it's just like, and I remember I recently, if you guys seen my Fats Domino video I just did, I talk about how Jerry Lee Lewis is, like, still alive. I think I mentioned that. And it's just, oh god. And I think, like, let's just talk about, like, the killer himself, which was a name he got in high school, and that was, his alias and all that. And what an incredible showman, piano player. He talked about how, he was jealous of guitar players, how they got to stand and really, perform and really just make a connection with their audience. And he just hated that he had to sit on a piano. So Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins said to him, why don't you just kick the piano stool and make that a real rock and roll instrument? And he did. He, Fats Domino, and Little Richard were the ones that really, like, shaped up what rock and roll was. And really, like, and Jerry Lee Lewis energized it. I mean, like, Fats Domino had his boogie woogie, like I said in the Fats Domino video. Little Richard, had his shrieking, screams, and his fast paced, going back and forth with the piano, sometimes putting the leg on his piano, putting his leg on the piano. And Jerry Lee Lewis, could just kick the piano stool and just, play crazy, like hit the keys very high, and just like, really just make you just be like, oh wow, this guy is awesome, and just what an incredible showman. I mean, you know, the songs he had, the biggest hits, of course, A Whole Lot of Shaking, Great Balls of Fire, Breathless, High School Confidential, were his four big hits in the 50s. And then, of course, it's probably an already well-known story. If you're a rock and roll fan, or, it's probably, you probably notice now, it's been well known and reported for years, but, with the internet and TikTok probably has even made it more clear that, if you talk about Jerry Lewis, you can't not mention that he married his 13-year-old cousin, which, yeah, if you've seen the movie Great Balls of Fire with Dennis Quaid, of course, and Winona Ryder plays, Myra Gale, who was his wife. And yeah, it was his third wife, actually. And yeah, that's another thing. He married the first wife when he was like 15 or 16, then cheated on her with another woman who he married and got her pregnant. And their first marriage wasn't settled yet. So it's like, and yeah, and the same when he married the third wife, technically his second marriage wasn't settled yet either. So it was a very, like, he lived a very colorful life. I mean, to tell you the truth, oh my god, I mean, the guy was 87, and the guy packed a lot of things to do, and at the age of 87. But yeah, this happened. This scandal happened in 1958 at the height of his career, and he was really becoming like the second biggest rock star up with Elvis Presley. I mean, when you thought of rock and roll pioneers, you had Bill Haley, Elvis, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Jerry Lewis, and Jerry Lewis came around the same year Buddy Holly did 57. Um, the Steve Allen Show is where Jerry Lewis really made it big, because he tried to be on Ed Sullivan, but Ed Sullivan didn't want him. Ed Sullivan was really not a huge rock and roll person to begin with. I mean, he didn't really want Elvis, but once Elvis was on Milton Berle, he felt like he had no choice if he wanted his show to be successful and modern to his audience. So when Jerry Lee Lewis, it was time to go on, Ed Sullivan rejected him, but Steve Allen had him on, and he thanked Steve Allen to the point where he named his son that he had with Myra Gale after him, Steve Allen Lewis, and that's another. I mean, there's so much tragedy in the guy's life too. I mean, his son, I think, like, yeah, drowned in a swimming pool when he was like 3 or 4. So it was really like, he really had a sad type of tragedies that he went through in his life. And he was married 7 times, and there's stories like with his sixth or fifth wife who died, that, like, and I don't want to go too into it. Like, this isn't about his personal life or whatever. This is a celebration of what he did with music. And maybe unfortunately, he didn't seem like, at times I don't think he was all well, but you know a lot of artists who are geniuses are misunderstood and not, always, mentally there. And that doesn't mean to say that's right or wrong. It's just that's how artists are, at times, but even though he, after, the scandal, his career kind of went downhill, he still had some big hits, or songs that became later on, like in 59, he did the song Wild Child, or I think his version was just called Wild One, even though it's a song called Real Wild Child that Buddy Holly did with his drummer Jerry Allison, where Jerry Allison took the lead vocals. But yeah, no, so there's that. And then and then, like, he went away for a little bit, and like in 61 he had a hit with Ray Charles, What I'd Say, which I forgot how big of the hit it was, but it was getting well known, so it was like, okay, he's getting back there on the charts. And then in 64 he went to England. I think he played with the Stones, actually. And then in the late 60s he made a real comeback, but this time he was going to country music and actually became very successful, playing country music. And, he was more accepted in that community than he was in rock and roll anymore. He didn't really make that many rock and roll records after. And, he was just inducted this year into the Country Music Hall of Fame, and he couldn't accept the award. That's why I knew, I guess, he was starting to get sick, because even in videos, he looked like he was getting older, and I wondered if he was going to go soon, if we were going to lose him anytime soon. And, but Chris Christopherson, came in and gave him the award. And I think what it was too was Chris Christopherson. Yeah, well, of course, he wrote Me and Bobby McGee, which is one of those songs where you can remember it from not just one artist, but of course, the most well known version is Janis Joplin's. And but apparently, Chris Christopherson has claimed that I think his favorite version was Jerry Lee Lewis's, and also Bill Haley's. I think he highly recommended too, because Bill Haley also did it. And I think he said about Bill Haley's was that's the way he intended the song to be. Like, that was the way. Like, Bill Haley did it the way he wrote it. Like, and Janis Joplin turned it more into a rock song. It was really like kind of more of a country type song. But yeah, no, but it's seen more as a rock type song. And then, yeah, Grateful Dead did it. A lot of artists have done it over the years. And like I said, it's one of those songs that people have done over and over again. But yeah, no, and like he did a version of he also did a version of the Big Bopper Chantilly Lace in the early 70s too. So yeah, no, he had some hits for the country music, but he never was as successful with the rock and roll community, or never really had even the success that Elvis had in the 70s and 60s. And like I've talked about that before, that Elvis's career was in his prime. And that's really the thing with a lot of these 50s musicians, were that, like, unlike people in the 60s, like, people, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, or Elton John or Billy Joel, who, were popular in their decade. They were able to transform their fame into another decade and still have, successful albums and songs. Like with, the surviving members of the Beatles, later on. I mean, of course, when they all broke up, all four of them had successful solo careers. In the 70s, Stones had successful albums in the 70s. Elton John, of course, and Billy Joel were big in the 80s. They were big in the 70s, then had some big albums and songs in the 80s, even 90s. But a lot of the 50s artists, to tell you the truth, did not have that. And of course, I mean, Buddy Holly died. So there was not, so who knows what would have happened. And yeah, none of them were able to really, be popular in another decade. And Chuck Berry had some songs in the early 60s that were covered by a lot of groups later on, like, well, like You Never Can Tell, or The Promised Land actually was covered not just by Elvis to Grateful Dead. So he had some songs in the 60s, in the early 60s, but I never really consider him a 60s artist either. I consider him way more of a 50s artist, even though he had some songs in the early 60s that people that are other artists covered that they liked. But I never really thought of him more. I really thought of him more as a 50s artist. But the only artist I could say that really probably transformed into another time and made themselves known in another decade might be somebody like a BB King, Roy Orbison, I'd say, Ray Charles. I mean, we're getting a little off rock and roll, but Frank Sinatra, even. Those are artists that I feel like were able to make a real impact in other decades. And that might be an unpopular opinion. I say that I don't feel like that Elvis had as much of that impact as people like Sinatra or Ray Charles. As much as I love Elvis, and listen, I'm a huge Elvis fan, so I don't want any Elvis fan getting really upset with me. But that's just how I feel. And I'm not saying that, like, there were some great songs that I liked from Elvis later on, but yeah. But getting back to Jerry Lee Lewis, I mean, when it comes to, like, his country stuff, I don't really care for that. I'm more into the 50s type of Jerry Lee Lewis. And but yeah, no, I mean, he was a successful musician still, and God, what a guy. And I think we're gonna end it there. And yeah, no, yeah, that's really all I got to say about that. I just want to make a quick video talking about that. I feel like I had to address that on my channel. I made an Instagram post about it, but you know, yeah. Rest in peace, Jerry Lewis. Love you. Bye.